Hi, Chris. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Brian. Hey, Paige.
Hello.
Got all kinds of people here.
Hey, Peggy.
Hi there, Vic.
Hey, Brian.
Hi, Vic. How are you?
Good, good. Mark, Paige. All right.
It'll be a full house this
Full
afternoon.
house indeed.
Yeah. Vic, I'm heartsick that Lucy Hartlett has left.
Oh, you're not the only one.
Oh, she was so great.
She was. She was, and she was on the cusp of doing so many great things for our department.
I know.
Outdoor education, her methodologies that she's really in tune to. Yeah, that hurt.
Have you seen, I probably haven't sent you the presentation that she and I worked on for the Venable kids for 3rd and 4th graders.
I don't think so. No.
Oh, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do. I'd
Yeah.
love to see
My
it.
son did the graphics, but she did the organization and we worked together on it. She was just so great, just so easy to work with and very organized. And are you going to replace her?
All the above. I doubt if we can replace her, but we'll try. We got lucky when we got her, I believe.
Yeah. But I mean, you think you'll have somebody that would be interested in outdoor education and natural resources and things?
I certainly hope so. I mean, that's what we're all about. We've got about 16 positions that we're trying to fill full time right now.
Wow.
Mike Renane being one. And
Oh, boy.
yeah, it's an uphill
It's like
climb,
makes
but
everything yellow.
I
looking
know.
forward to next fiscal year, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think the summer camps were really tough for her.
I'm sorry, Peggy, I didn't hear that.
I think the summer camps were tough. Running the summer camps were hard.
It's all better.
Always is.
Yeah.
Always is. It's like running a school.
Yeah.
So we are at the hour. We just await one more. And there we go. One more commissioner for a quorum. We have a second. So we have a quorum. I'm expecting probably one or two more. Of course, our membership is down one with Mike having left, but we'll talk more about that later in the meeting. So I will go ahead and call the December meeting of the Tree Commission to order. This is our 15th episode of the Tree Commission on Zoom.
Wow.
Well, I went back and counted, which I think is enough to make a greatest hits DVD. I'm not sure if that's something we can pull together, but I think we have enough hours now to at least get 90 minutes of good stuff. When of course, this is going to sound a little like a broken record because we've gone through this a couple of times, but I did check in with Brian Wheeler. I guess it was probably in August or September as to the future plans for boards and commissions. And at that time, he said that we'd probably be moving to in-person by January. I'm highly doubting that now, and I'm wondering if anybody on staff can confirm that at this moment, one way or the other.
I highly doubt that as well. This is Vic, acting director. I don't believe Sam missed our leadership team meeting on Monday, and we were going to talk about that, but we will certainly know more in the next week. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Well, that we'll look forward to hearing something definite, but that doesn't surprise me. We've done quite well here, although occasionally Peggy and I talk about what we lose. We gain a lot from being here. I think we all agree, but we also lose something. So we look forward to returning or to leaving the virtual world at some point soon. Commissioners, you know, in the email that I sent that with all of the transition last month, the one thing that fell through the cracks was somebody to take the notes and prepare the minutes for the November meeting. We do have notes. I just didn't have time to go back and polish my notes up. So we don't have November minutes. We will have them in the January meeting, both the November and December minutes. We did talk to Ryan about this, and Mike used to take the minutes, the notes, and then prepare the minutes, which is one of the tasks of staff. So that will continue going forward. And so we will have somebody taking notes tonight and preparing draft minutes for us to review. That's Paige. So thank you, Paige, for joining us and for taking our minutes. We have a lot tonight. We have a lot of exciting things to talk about. December is always, for most boards and commissions, year end, sort of a little bit of a look back and look ahead. Obviously, there's been a lot happening, as we all know, in the city and also in our home department of Parks and Recreation. We have a lot of new people, new faces tonight, at least new to some of you. And so what I thought I would do first is,
appreciate having water.
sorry. No, I thought I heard. So we have, I want to make sure that we hit everybody and then we get into sort of staff reports and committee reports. So you all know from at least one or two meetings, Vic Garber, who's joining us, who's the acting director of Parks and Rec. So we thank you, Vic, for joining us. Also, I want to thank you for having included the commission in the round of interviews for deputy and deputy director. And we look forward to the round of interviews, which we'll talk about later, the process for the new urban forester. So thank you. A welcome to our new deputy director. Again, he may be new to some of you and not new to others. Rhiannon Anthony is joining us. And he will be filling us in on a couple of items that are on the agenda. So we'll turn to him in a moment. And then, of course, Chris Jensick, who I think most of you will know or recognize from around city and around city government. I think, Chris, you were with the commission probably through to 2017, because I seem to recall my early meetings that you were there. I think Mike came on not long after that. So
yeah, I was there for the formation and staffed it for a number of years. And so I'll say hi and turn my camera off because my camera's not very happy.
okay. So we want to welcome Chris back, who's will serve as the interim staff liaison as the search is conducted for a new urban forester. You also know that soon, hopefully next month at our January meeting, we will have the new director of Parks and Rec to join us. I believe it's Dana Kassler. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So we have a leadership team that's coming together, and we're excited about working with all of you. We appreciate all your time and effort, and we've already had a meeting and many emails and exchanges with Rhiannon. So we really have hit the ground running there. The big piece of the puzzle obviously is going to be in the coming months, securing an urban forester. And so we look forward to that process as well. So welcome to everybody and thank you again. I'm going to turn it over now to Rhiannon to talk about the first two items on the staff report, the urban forester, that process, and also update the commission on the tree planting process.
Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Rhiannon Anthony. I'm the Deputy Director of Parks and Recreation. I believe the first day I walked into the office, that was Mike Rene's soon-to-be last day. So I appreciate the chair and Peggy that I've been communicating with is to just try to fill in the missing gaps. So I've been really, really busy with Tree Commission. Also very busy trying to look at the scope and scale of the urban forest. So at the moment, we are treading water in terms of all the phone calls and all the emails, in terms of taking care of the trees. I appreciate the strong team, including Chris Genzik, been helping me out, and Vic Garber, the acting director, for stepping in. So we're doing a three-step approach. So I'll be talking about my roles and updating you on the information, and then I'll hand it off to Chris, because Chris is handling the canopy study. So number one, just talking about the job description. The good news is that the job description and the posting has been posted. That's good news. I tried to look at the job description, worked with human resources. The job description is basically set the way it is. So it was very hard to make any major adjustments. But the most important part, the job has been advertised. The job will be closing on the 20th of this month. Very robust. The 20th. After the 20th, we will review all applications, and then we will bring candidates in the middle of January. My goal is a soft deadline of completing all the interviews by the end of January. So those are the department's deadlines. I appreciate the questions that was emailed to me. I will be incorporating that into the candidate questions. Also, we'll be inviting one member of the Tree Commission to be part of the panel to sit in those interviews. Right now, thanks again to Brian and Peggy for giving me some avenues to advertise. We are advertising on most of the social media platforms, our website, and a few recommendations from the Tree Commission. If you do have friends that are interested, please do share this information. The next, we will be talking about the tree planting. Again, the tree planting, we have finalized the RFQ. The RFQ is out. What I mean by out is it is out on the city procurement page. It closes this Friday, so that's good news. So it is closing this Friday at 2 o'clock. Once I get the bids, I'll be able to start negotiating with the contractor on accomplishing the tree planting. The RFQ calls for a staff member to flag all the new trees where they're going to be planted. So that will be done in-house. The contractor will come out, call out mistakes, and plant the trees. I am working with a few contractors at the moment because we need a arbiter to follow up behind the contractor to make sure that the right species are planted at the right locations. So I'm working on that. So that will be a small, shall I say, subcontractor that we will be using in order to meet and fulfill the needs of the RFQ. I believe that is all my updates, Chris Genzik.
Hey, I have received, I did the first urban tree canopy study, I think in 08 or 10. I kind of managed the contract on that one. I know there's been at least one done since, and Mike was right in the middle of one when he moved on. So I have taken on the task of getting that over the hump and getting it finalized. So last week, I spoke with the contractors out of Colorado, and they had a few questions, and then they delivered a interim set of maps and spreadsheets and report they're probably at a 75% completion roughly. They might be a little further than that, but we do have a package of maps by neighborhood, by parcel, overall canopy. We have, I think, lost some canopy. I think their average right now is in the 40% plus a little bit of change, not quite the 41. So I think the first one we did, we were in the 47 realm, maybe in '08. So there's a decline showing in the data. There's maps that show by neighborhood, which one's declined by how much, which one's gained by how much. And probably in the report, which I've not had time to delve into, some explanations of how that data was derived. I'm going to be looking at some of those. We could probably do some screen share if we'd like, but I'm looking at it. I live in Belmont, and I know there's been 2 developments in Belmont, Stonehenge and Randolph Hampton Street, and kind of looking at how many acres those are and how many acres is Belmont, and does that tree loss account for the total decline in Belmont, or is there some other thing going on? Is it that the air photo is a different quality? We're trying to keep these 5-year increments pretty consistent in terms of how data is gathered and how it's analyzed, so that we can say consistently that, yeah, the loss or gain in trees is actual trees and not some anomaly in data. But right at the moment, I haven't been able to do that. So Brian mentioned I could do some screen sharing. I think myself and staff and maybe even commissioners, because they will give us a final report, I believe by the 31st or early January, something I would recommend is that we all take a look at this data. And if something pops out and, that's curious, why is that number what it is? How did you get that number? It's a good time while the consultants are still in this phase to ask them those questions. The map on page 37 doesn't make sense to me for this reason. Could you please tell me why neighborhood X seems to have this lost number of Y or a gain? Some neighborhoods had gains. So I would advise, after some discussion tonight, that probably be pretty brief because we just got the data, people dig into it more, and anything that pops out at you that you would like the consultant to explain in more detail in the next couple of weeks is probably the best time to get those questions back to them before they send us the final report. So keep that in mind. This data is 75% wrapped up, complete. I know we're supposed to be talking about the state of the forest report. Some of this can probably go in the state of the forest as long as we know it's X% defendable data at the moment. So did you want to share, Brian, particular maps, or should I just pop a few up here? Has the commission received that package, or just you, Brian?
I believe everybody received it when you sent it out on Friday. I think there were a couple in particular. I think really just the top line numbers, again, with the caveat that, we'd want to go back and have a look. But I think, the concern obviously is loss. So I think we pulled up the canopy change across by neighborhood, and I think across the city. If you had those to share.
Yeah, and I may need your computer to allow screen share. I just tried to screen share and it says it's disabled by the host.
And the host?
Should have a screen share now.
Okay, let me make sure. I had a folder open with these maps on it.
So while Chris is pulling that up, and some of this will just sort of backfill and reiterate on a little of what he said. But just because we've been talking about this canopy study since really last year, delayed obviously by the dislocation of the pandemic. So normally we would have done this last year, every 5 years. And so that would have been looking back and then looking back at the previous year's data. It got pushed into this year. And then, as commissioners will recall, Mike came back to us and said that we would probably not be able to use the 19 flyover data because there was a difference in scale. So made the decision to look at the data from 18. So it's sort of dislocated twice. We're doing it a little later and we're looking back to earlier data. So I think it's really important in that context for the commission to keep in mind that it really is a look back, which means that we've all witnessed the trends since 2018. So I think we'll be able to, while it won't be hard data, we'll be able to sort of extrapolate as to where we think we are today when we go forward, but certainly looking at what things look like in 2018. And again, as Chris pointed out, this is sort of the raw data. It's reliable, but we still have to get the final report from the consultant. I would say just off the top that it confirms what we have been sensing for a while, which is fine. So, I mean, if we look across neighborhoods, which Chris just pulled up, even if these numbers are off by a little, it's with the exception of UVA 1 up there on the left-hand side. I mean, it's just a consistent decline in canopy. If these numbers are off by a little, I think we can still say that between 2014 and 2018, there was a sizable loss, continued loss in canopy. I think just overall, when we look back at what we've presented as recently as last year to council, the 2014 numbers were overall tree canopy of 45%. So as Chris pointed out, if we're talking 40, 41, that is still a decline in 4 years' time, not 5 years' time, but a decline in 4 years' time of about 5%. And to put that in perspective, if you start at 2004, where we had 50%, and you go to 09, where it goes down to 47%, and you go to 14, where it goes down to 45%, and now we're looking in a 4-year period after that to roughly 40, 41%, it just is not a very good trend line. And I think that to Chris's other point, and there's a lot of data here, and Peggy and I were talking about this today, we're really going to want to go back and look. It's not enough to look at any one map and see, well, it's decline in these neighborhoods, et cetera, and figure out a simple solution. Because in some of these cases, when you look at some of these maps and some of the spreadsheets, it's decline, but it's decline not necessarily on city property, right? So it's decline on private property. And so therefore, what tools do we have to address that? In other cases, when they get into some of these maps where, plantable area, which they'll flesh out more in the final report, some places are declining, but they don't have areas to plant in. So this is really, and I say this not just for the commission's sake, but I say this because obviously this is a public meeting, that this is a first look at the data. I think the big picture is that it's not great news, but I think that we need to, have time to sit with this over the coming months, certainly, and to go back and then to use this. And if you haven't, commissioners, if you haven't looked just at these maps, by the way, the overall data is 200 megabytes. So you get the maps, but there's tremendous amount more data in other forms. You'll see that this is not an easy thing. You can't just wrap your head around this in an hour. It really takes time to look at it. I know staff will be doing this, and I think it's really critical for commissioners to be looking at this. Something to do over the holidays, I suppose, but it's important because it's really going to inform not only our goals, but strategy going forward for the coming years. Because again, we're not scheduled to do another study like this for 5 years. So we want to make sure, well, at this point, 4 years probably, in 2025. We want to make sure that we use this and understand this as much as possible so that we can use it in planning and then in advocating for the forest. Have you, just a show of hands, how many have actually had a chance? I know it's a lot, but have you had a chance, commissioners, to look at these maps in the last few days, or at least to look at some of them? So I guess I'm just interested in, I'm going to throw it out there, throw it open, and just any initial thoughts from commissioners who've looked at this. Anything surprise you, shock you pleasantly, one way or the other? You learn anything from what you've seen so far? I know Peggy's had a chance to think about it, and I'm sure Mark Rylander's looked at it. Peggy?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about it. We probably had a little more time to look at it. I think it was interesting. Roxanne White sent us a note today saying, if you look at it from 2004 to 2014, it was minus 5%, which was about a 0.5 decrease every year. if you look at it from 2014 to 2018, that's only 4 years instead of 10. It was a 5%, but a 1.2% decline each year. So the decline has more than doubled in the last 4 years, if you're following my math there. So it's not great. And every single neighborhood, except for University 2, has declined. Some, if you see, more than 10%. So I don't think there's any good news there.
So
Jody?
May I just pause for a second? I want to be clear about this. I'll be giving a report, a committee report at Planning Commission next Tuesday, just before the CIP meeting. So I want to have my data, they be clear. 2004, 50%, 2015, 45%, 2018, 40%. Is that what I heard? Is there another canopy study somewhere in between those?
2014, it's 2004, 2014, 2018.
I got that. Okay, good.
I think you hit it right, Jody. It's been a 5% each time we did a study, if I recall.
Okay.
So,
perfect.
so I have, Jody, I have it in front of me. In 2004, it was 50. In 09, it was 47. 14, it was 40.
Whoa. 09, that's another one. 47,
Yes.
47%?
Correct.
Okay.
In 14, it was 45. And in 18, we're looking at roughly 40 to 41%, but
It's 40.
we'll call it 40.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
And the other thing to note is, and again, last year when we reported to council, we didn't have, obviously, we had 14 data. What we did was, and I think Anson did this for us, Anson Parker, looked at some iTree data and tried to extrapolate and just, assume like, are we continuing that loss? And we pretty much knew we were continuing the loss and there was a loss. And so we reported back to council with the caveat that we were going to be conducting a study this year of the flyover. So now, and at the time, we came up with that little bullet graphic, which showed what that acreage, what that translated into acres. And again, that's total, all throughout the city boundary. So now we went back and looked at it now that we have this 18 data. And it's a little confusing because we're not sure how we got what measure, what size, how many square miles we use for the city. But if you just take the numbers that, and again, we should say, if Chris didn't say this, I can't remember, this is the same contractor consultant that did this study that it did last go around and may have done previous ones, I don't know. But so there's a good baseline. They have experience with the city and data and all that. They calculate 7,000 acres, which is a little different than the calculation used for that chart last year. They calculate 7,006 acres. And if you take that and you show that in 2004, 50% canopy was 3,500 acres, 2018, that's 2,800 acres. We're actually looking at 700 acres loss. What we've been saying is 460. If you use a calculation based on the square miles of the city, and we'll get this right before we go to council, but I just want to make the point that the actual, if you use a calculation, I think it's on the internet that Peggy found at 10.26 square miles, it's 6,500 acres. You still end up with a loss of roughly 650 acres from 14 to 18. And of course, we're in 21. So we actually way underestimate because we didn't have this 2018 data. So now going forward, when we advocate to council, especially for resources, the number in terms of total loss is even higher. So again, that may be tweaked, and I want to caution. Chris has said this, and I'll say it again. This is a bit of a work in progress. It's a first look, but it's not a great first look, and I don't think it surprises anybody. But I think it's still shocking. And I think since we've just gone through a round working with staff and we worked hard to come up with numbers, and we've gone for CIP, the 2 CIP requests, and we'll talk about that in a minute, even though it's not on the agenda. Whether this is loss on public or private lands, there have to be better ways for the city to address this in terms of policy and in terms of resources. And I think that's just the message going forward. I see Jane's hand is up. Jane, you have a comment or question?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Take the headset off because I can't hear myself when I go. Yeah, I looked at them in a very cursory way and I was sort of depressed by it, but didn't know whether I had accurate data to be depressed. But now that you're talking, I'm even more depressed. But my question that came up was, what are the sources of the loss? What's causing the trees to go away? And because you can't address turning it around unless you know what, is it construction? Is it loss of trees through natural causes because of climate? Is it, what is it? You know, what are the reasons and how much do they account for what percentage of loss so that we can get a handle on it?
I saw Chris's mic go off. Chris, you want to take
That's one of the things on a trend analysis I've been curious about. I actually had them outline the Meadow Creek stream restoration and sewer project because that was done more than 10 years ago. And I want to go back and look in detail. Well, at what point does what was a full forest that went to a moonscape that was replanted that is now should be showing up as canopy at some point in time? That would be a massive construction project that was linear, but ought to be kind of coming back. And then I also want to look at something like Cherry Hill neighborhood. I used to live over in that part of Fry Spring, and that was a forest we'd go walk the dog in. Well, it got stripped, rebuilt as a neighborhood. And then can you see 10, 12 years out, did our street canopy requirements for a new neighborhood end up accomplishing the overall goal of, let's say it was 10% for a dense neighborhood? Looking at these things over a trend line, and it might take the next time we do this to see, think about your own neighborhood. Like I know in Belmont, Stonehenge PUD and Randolph Street, they were scraped clean 4 years ago. Like I know they're going to pop in as absolute losses, but go back and look at something that was built maybe in 08 and see in terms of how do we look at code, streets that work. Let's look at something that was built 8 years ago on a certain set of code standards and see, is that canopy showing up to what it ought to be? Because you're going to have loss during initial construction, but are we at least getting back what we hope? So those are the kind of bits I kind of want to get into at a deeper level. And real quick, before I let y'all keep talking, they did we asked them to go back in time and try to do, I think they did a 50s decade analysis from a data point in the 50s and a data point in the 70s. So we wanted to see, because I knew when we did the first forest plan in the 20s, this place was a cow field. We had almost like 10% canopy. So
Right.
we could be proud of a trend line where we got a lot of canopy, but if that trend line has now reversed and we're losing that canopy that we gained in the last couple of decades, that's something we got to look at. And to your point, why? What are the causes of this? And are our codes going to ensure that when the dust settles, we're actually where we want to be?
Chris, let me ask you a question from a sort of a outside hearing this, and I'm actually, maybe I'll fall back a little bit on my undergrad and forestry degree, having done quite a bit of time, timber cruises. But so if I were listening to this first time, and I'd be thinking number of trees versus tree canopy. So like, for example, I know a large tree in my yard we took down. It was hollow. We took it down several years ago, but it's all, that canopy is pretty much filled in. So how would you, if someone were to ask, how do you put this in terms of numbers of trees, age of the trees versus simply that canopy cover? Or am I missing something?
That gets down to how they take the air photo and what it reads as, again, when does a 2 dBH tree look like a sapling to a satellite, look like a shrub layer until it calls itself canopy in a data layer? And when does that make your parcel jump by 10%? I'm in the same thing in Belmont, they're 10% increments. So you may have a tree that's at a 9% that won't pop in as 10 for another 3 years. So those are the things that make this cloudy and muddy. It's a satellite read and it's kind of fuzzy on the edges, but the trend, if it's 5% a year, that's a pretty clear trend that plus or minus a percent here and there, we still know what the trend is.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and to that point, I think the question that Gene started us off on and these comments, I think it's very important that we understand, because understanding will allow us to refine what we're doing right and to do things that we're not doing and to stop doing things that we shouldn't be doing. But when a goal is set at 50%, however you got to 40%, something's not right. And so figuring out what we need to do, I think, is going to be a big challenge for all of us, because the continued decline is really not sustainable. And I will say, and we've said this before, and it's one of the reasons why we pushed harder for more resources for planting, that certainly one of the areas we know that we can do better is in planting trees. It's a challenge, but it's a challenge we've set for ourselves. And that's something that is clearly within the grasp of the commission and the city to be able to do that. There are more complicated issues, as we all know, with how to deal with development and how to find a way, perhaps through the zoning code rewrite, to put a little bit more teeth into a process, because we know that a lot of the losses occurred that way too. Again, we still need to look at where it's happened, but I think we can intuit a lot of this. I don't think we need to, where the actual loss is and which neighborhoods, which parts of the city, and what the cause is and what the remediation might be is a much more complicated question. I think that's what everybody is getting at here. Jeff, our other Jeff has been patient. His hand is up.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, to piggyback on that a little bit, and I think leading off with what Jean was asking about, I'm wondering about impervious areas as measured by the city. So if we've seen losses of green space to impervious areas like roofs, driveways, new roads, parking lots, even ball fields, play fields, areas that are lawn, ultimately those are never going to become forest canopy, right? So I think understanding that trend line also relative to areas that have become impervious is an important thing to understand. If those have basically been taken out of play and can't really ultimately become part of our canopy, that's also an important data number to have. And maybe that's what this is getting at. And I'm sorry if I haven't delved into that enough. The other question had to be with urban tree life expectancy. So, if we are looking at cow fields that are now forested, what does that look like in terms of lifespan of our urban forest? Can we expect 60 years out of, and I'm not talking about street trees, I'm talking about like the huge oaks that are in my backyard that were probably planted when Greenbrier was developed in the 1960s. Are those aging out? And because I've certainly seen losses locally where people just take out trees and they're not replacing them because they have died, basically, probably because of age, not because of disease. So those
Chris,
are two things I wanted to add.
Chris, do you want to address those since you pulled up the map? Or
Yeah, okay, here I am. Found my
Yeah.
mute button here. There is something in there, Jeff, that describes how they read tree canopy over turf, tree canopy over impervious, because there's the root, what's on the ground, and then there's the way they do the data. You can have an oak tree in a parking lot and it knows that in a certain sense. So let's make sure we read that, but you're correct in terms of land uses that can't be changed and how that affects possible planting area. You obviously don't put trees in a soccer field, but you could put them in a parking lot kind of thing. So where are the best return on investments for limited budgets, limited code amendments? And I think it's buried in the data. It's somewhere in the reporting. So that's an interesting thing for people to look at, how to interpret a nice tree lined parking lot versus a completely built out block with zero canopy on it. We'll have to look into that. Good question. I'll see if I can get better answers as I look at the data.
That'd be great, Chris. I mean, as we see more density in the downtown area, we're going to see more roofs, right? I mean, a lot more
Yeah.
roofs.
Yeah.
So,
Which is great for the hinterlands, but it affects our urban tree canopy.
absolutely, right.
Mark Rylander, patiently.
Yeah, I was drawn to the maps that dealt with the right of way, which I don't remember seeing in the past. And given that that's sort of a primary charge for the tree commission, I'll be interested to find out a little bit more about definition of right of way. I would not imagine it's all city land, but it would be a certain portion of city land. And it would be a metric relative to street trees, and the numbers around the right of way are not nearly as big as they are in terms of percent change, which makes sense because it's a relatively stable area if it is what I think it is. It shows some opportunities there, but just kind of raising that for other commissioners to think about, given that we have, it's sort of more our purview. And then Jeff's question is the flip side, really, of that. And I've asked a similar question in the past as we were contemplating neighborhoods, because I've always been interested in sort of what the structure of a particular neighborhood is. A neighborhood with small lot sizes that have a lot of lot coverage by buildings versus the opposite with large lots. We want to make sure that as we plan initiatives relative to a neighborhood, that we're understanding, that composition as we make policy recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to the point of how the data sort of cross cuts in many respects. So again, it's going to take time for us to all digest this, because if you look at it initially, you'll say, oh, here's the answer, it's here, and it's here, and then you stop and think, well, no, there's no place to plant there. So, and so, yeah, I mean, I think it's not a simple solution, but we do know some things that we can do going forward. And there's a lot of work in this. I was not on the commission when the last report, wait a minute, I guess I was. I can't remember I guess the last report came out just before I joined the commission, because we're a little bit behind. I was not aware, I saw the report, but I had not seen all the data. I was not aware. I was actually very impressed with how much data we got. So if you like data and you haven't dived into this yet, again, you've got the entire holiday season. There's a lot of stuff here, and it's really fascinating and it's really useful. And I think that we should make sure, again, to Chris's point, because I know he's going to be working on this and other staff members, we paid good money for this, and there's a lot of value here. Let's get as much as we can out of this data, because it really is going to guide what we do, not for months, but for some years ahead. And in retrospect, I really wish that the calendar had worked differently and we had this data earlier and we were presenting it to council earlier, and we were going before, planning commission and council with our CIP request earlier, because this data is coming a little late for that process this time around, but so be it. We have to work with what we have. Jody?
So I just want to make a comment that I don't think we need to be concerned at this point about making the proper proposals for how we reverse this. I think that's a much bigger problem, as Mark pointed out, that needs to have close consideration, fine tuning based upon the neighborhoods, also what public land there is and what the private land there is. I think we are simply the messengers. We are gathering the data. That's the wonderful thing about having the committee and what has been done in the last few years. We are gathering the data. We see the trend and we are bringing it to the attention of the city. Until we can get the city to decide that it's a dire situation and something needs to be done, and they put some money into a plan for how do we turn things around. I think that would be what we would be hoping for from the city. But right now, we'd like to get the money just to hold even with the CIP.
Yeah, exactly. Peggy, did you use your hand up there?
Yes, I just wondered can I share my screen? I just wanted to show one thing. Does Remy, can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to.
All right. Let's see. I don't know if I can. Whoops. Oh, okay. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
I just wanted to, last year, Jody was so great because when we calculated that we had lost 460 acres from 2004 to 2020, it was about 460 acres. And now we know it's between 650 to 700 acres. So you can imagine how big that circle is going to grow. I mean, it's probably at least 50% bigger. So I just, some of you maybe hadn't seen this or just reminded, because Jody was really the one. And
Yeah.
so we can get, once we know what it is, we can get Paul to redo this. I think it's a pretty visual representation of what we're looking at. And I think, you know, one thing else I think to talk about too, it's not only do we want to plant more trees, we want to save the ones we've got. And that's makes it very important that we can spend money on preservation of our trees. I think that's really important to, and we know we're going to lose, what is it, 360 ash trees over the next 5 years. So things are not looking great.
So to take your points in sort of reverse order, probably about 270 out of the 300 ashes, because we're still treating 30 something, but still. point
Yeah.
taken. Also, the map, I just want to point out that, you know, last year that was kind of our best guess. And it was, if you saw on the screen, Peggy pulled up, we presented that to council in 2 forms. That was 2004 to 2020. That was our extrapolating based on sort of interim data, and we were wrong. So I want to be clear that it hasn't been a change in a year just because members of the public who might be listening in, it's not that last year it was 460 and this year it's suddenly between 650 and 700. It was wrong last year. And it was wrong in a weird sort of way because we sort of plugged in other data because we didn't have a tree study. And because frankly, we wanted to be able to show some graphic, and it did capture council's attention. I know that when I presented it in January of this year, that they noticed that slide very much. As a matter of fact, I've said before, we put it at the beginning and at the end. So to Jody's point, yes, I mean, that's our job. And, you know, we are committed, we're passionate. I think, you know, I believe staff understands that. We're willing to work hard with them. We're going to be continue to advocate for resources. And to Jody's other point, we have to stop, you know, we have to stop the loss. Anything that we can do, the CIP requests that we put forward, and we'll talk about where those stand in a moment while we have staff and Jody with us. Those requests made it very clear how far behind we continue to be in terms of tree planting, and made very clear that we have to be watching out about robbing Peter to pay Paul when it comes to dealing with emerald ash borer, when we have, to Peggy's point, lots of trees to preserve and maintain. I'm preaching to the choir. I know we all agree on that. And I know this is hard and there's a lot of demand on resources, but money is part of the issue here. I mean, you know, resources are part of the issue to begin, at least one way to begin to address this situation. Before we move on to other items, including CIP status, are there any other comments or questions on this?
I've got a quick follow-up because I think I'm going to have to get out of here at 6 o'clock. I believe with this report data, and I may be helping with working to get a state of the forest report to council. So I think it was Peggy and Brian. Mike mentioned to me that you might have a few bits of information or data graphics or something you were going to ask of me. So if the three of us can talk, or whoever's going to finalize and polish that report after tonight's meeting, I'd be happy to provide whatever you need out of my folders and what this new data does to add to that report for the state of the forest. Vic might know more when he talks to Sam about if that's going to be on the January agenda and how we pull that off.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we will definitely be coming back to you. And that leads into 2 items that you've referenced. One, I did not send the or more recent draft of the fiscal year report to council because we were digesting this data. So that is something that we will work on in the coming weeks. will incorporate some of this. We can in fact incorporate all of this into the report, even though the report is a look back at the last fiscal year, because this is data from 2018. I consider it fair game to update all of the information we have there, including creating a new bullet chart to show what the actual acreage loss is, and to really spell out both in charts and graphs and narrative that we have an even bigger problem than we came before you last year. The second part, and so that's the written report. The second part, the presentation, which we'll talk more looking forward, that is scheduled for us. Mike did get us on council's calendar for January 18th. So if we can, pull all of this together, I'm sure we can, working with Chris and other staff, we'll be able to meet those goals. So the commission can look to see a written fiscal year report, final draft. Now I'm hoping by the end of the month. We probably won't get it to council before then. And then we'll be going into the cycle where we'll be making our presentation to council. So I will correct something I said a minute ago. I mean, we might not be able to use all of this for the budget process, but we are definitely, it doesn't arrive too late. It arrives in good time for the messaging part, as Jody said, for what we're going to be saying when we go before council in both the written report and also the presentation, that this is, hot off the presses, fresh out of the oven data. And it's troubling. So we will be able to use it for that. Any other questions about the data or about the report to council, any of that? Yeah, Rianne?
Hi, just want to let you know that I will just double check again to see if that information landed on council's agenda for 18th. If not, I will make sure that we can put it as a placeholder. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Thank you. And while we have you, I did have just to circle back, I did have one question about tree planting.
Mhm.
When we talked, you and Peggy and I talked a couple of weeks ago about this, the concern that had been expressed at recent commission meetings that we had raised with Mike was just a concern sort of projecting forward. Obviously, you've addressed the issue of planting the trees and what will require staff resources for that and what will require a contractor. But I think our bigger concern was when it comes time next year to maintain the trees. And in terms of, we're still in a sort of an uncertain labor market and all that. So, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you address that? How, sort of what your thinking is right now about that?
Yeah, so great question. As internally talking to the team, one of my objectives for parks is to fill positions. That's my number one objective right now, is to fill positions, because if we do not fill positions, we will not be able to meet the needs of all our outcomes. When I mean outcomes, is all our jobs that we have to get done. So we are talking to the whole team. The whole team is a team of 7. Just want to let you know, we only have 3 full-time employees right now. So that is the team that I'm truly focusing on, is to try to fill positions. So my goal is, if we do have a full team or close to a full team, we will come up with a strategy by looking at some efficiencies and looking at how we do our day-to-day in order to meet those needs. So that's the conversations I'm having internally, internal discussions with the team.
Okay, thank you. And I think maybe repeating something we talked about a few weeks ago, but I think Peggy's several times made her pitch for this new technology or approach for watering trees. But if you haven't heard from Peggy about that, she'll be happy to fill you in on that.
Oh, we discussed the tree diapers.
Oh, okay. All right. So she's brought it up. All right. I'm going to give Peggy credit for that.
Rian, did I send you the link to the internet on those?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's a lot of meaty stuff, all of that to digest. A lot of work to be done, but it's good. It's good to have knowledge and information. So now we'll turn to committee reports, and since I bumped myself down from the start of the meeting, I will just lead us through the first item, which is our annual. Those of you who've been on the commission know that every December we take a look at the calendar and sort of walk through it. Each year we spend a little less time on it because we've refined it. So I think Paul and Roxanne started this process, or certainly since I joined the commission, they did a lot of work to refine this calendar. But I hope you all have had a chance to look at it. And if there's anything, and I know occasionally Mark has seen something, Mark Rylander, and we've sort of bumped things around because it didn't work, but is there anything on our calendar, and I'm looking right now, not at our meeting dates, but the actual month-by-month business, is there anything there that seems out of place or that anybody recollects didn't work in that month, or that particularly new commissioners might have questions about? I see Vicky. Vicky?
I'd like to propose adding something. Is it appropriate to bring that up now?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So I'd suggest that in November, we submit proposed legislative agenda items to City Council for the upcoming General Assembly session. I know we missed that this year, but we may still be able to make some recommendations early in January when the General Assembly begins.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know you had raised that at one point earlier, and particularly for the Codes Committee, but I think that that's a great way to, to have some say to sort of on these bigger policies, because we know clearly that state policies, especially Dillon Rule and all that, dictates a lot of what the city can and cannot do. So we should take every opportunity to weigh in. So definitely adding that into the agenda. Anything else that anyone sees, Peggy?
I thought on February, where we have receive Arborist 6 months dashboard report, that's going to be way too early because hopefully we'll have a new urban forester by then. But I think, getting up to speed on that is going to be tough by February. So my thought was to move it to either April or March, whereas the time we might, I think with a new arborist, we need to go over what the data we're collecting now, and I would imagine that person would have some new things. And so I would think maybe presenting to the commission maybe in April, just a review of the data that we collect and see if we want to change the charts in any way. So anyway, I just, you and I can work on that, but that's just a thought, how we change that.
Does that affect the grant considerations, what we would apply for a grant with the USFS?
No, I'm just talking about the charts that we do, that all the data that we collect for the city council report.
Okay, so that information,
that doesn't have
information doesn't inform the grant process.
No.
Okay.
Jody, I don't believe it does. And I'm not sure. Well, and I'm glad you flagged that, because that grant is not an every year grant. So we need to, meaning Peggy and I and staff need to check into that, because we wouldn't want to miss out. If 2022 is a year where there's actually a grant available, we want to make sure that we can get that money. So let's everybody put that on their action item list. To Peggy's point, I agree that we, hopefully, yes, I know the goal is to have a new arborist, but that person would be starting right around that time, ideally, so we should probably consider, we should definitely move that. That's going to happen. I think that just for the record, that when we get back into a normal cycle, that we would bump that back up, obviously, to February, because we had an every, Roxanne had sort of set it up in an every 6 month. But yes, for this year, for 2022, I think we should bump that into April. Any other items that seem, and also any staff having a chance to look at this, anything that seems out of place. Again, we've been refining this, so.
This is a little bit of a stretch, and maybe not even possible, and given where we are with getting a new urban forester online. But there is more than one season to plant trees in Virginia. You can plant trees in the early spring. So if we could, because we are looking at a backlog. So is there a way to think about proposing some tree plantings that could happen early next year? I mean, I know we're also currently just looking at like funding the RFP that's just gone out to plant trees this fall. But if we are really with the backlog, can we look at having more than one time a year in which we might advocate for that?
I mean, I certainly think that's a question for staff. Rian?
Yeah, again, since we do not know, we're hoping to have the position filled by then, it's going to be a very hard ask to do it again.
Sure.
Number two, I'll also have to look at the funding, because I don't know what the numbers are going to come in. And the trends are right now, for the procurement department, is that most cost estimates that we thought was reasonable is pushed up now to up to 30% higher, because the consultants, the contractors, everybody is looking for a contractor due to lack of staff. So again, I cannot say yes or no. I'll have to first get those numbers in,
Sure, that makes sense.
look at the budget, and then come up with a strategic plan with the new staff.
Thank you, Rian. And it's so it's not necessarily material, it has more to do with staff. is
It's
what
got
you're
to
seeing in
do-
the industry.
It's got to
Yeah.
do with staff
Mhm.
and funding.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, maybe we put it on the agenda for next fall to
Oh.
say, see if we could make something work for the spring of 2023.
Now, again, when it comes to the fall, instead of planting X amount, we might be able to plant more.
Sure.
So again, to me, it's all about planning
Yeah. Yeah.
and strategic planning. And again, if we put out 2 RFQs, it will cost twice as much. But
Sure.
if we put 1 RFQ out per year with the increase, it's less
Mhm.
of a cost on that contractor instead of coming out twice, he is only coming out once, but it's
Sure.
just an increase in the
Right.
number of planting. So
Does
those are
that then put a higher burden on you all if there's like twice as many plants that then need to be monitored, watered, reviewed, et cetera? I mean, I think we could look at that next year and see what the advantages are if you get bulk discounts, but then it adds to your labor, and there's more intensity in the fall, and it's better to have it spread out. But it's good to know that the commission is sort of open to that, thinking about that next year. I know we have extenuating circumstances this fall and into the spring, but I'd love to have that as an agenda later next year.
Sure, and you most definitely, and you're 100% correct, is the more trees we plant, the more maintenance goes into those trees. But again, as I mentioned earlier, looking at the processes, looking at efficiencies, looking at new technologies,
Yeah.
can we accomplish those tasks efficiently?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
I guess the other thing, Jeff, was traditionally we planted in the fall because it gives the trees a little more time to kind of settle in. So before the summer comes, and the trees traditionally kind of survive better, but
Right.
So I think
As we
that's
see
been the
warming
thinking.
trends and, certain trees do okay in that spring, February, and soil's not frozen potentially. So I think as we look at a backlog, it may be something to think about.
So just to clarify, because we're sort of in the midst of the current fiscal year, we're and we've been talking about next request for next fiscal year for CIP. So if I'm correct, I mean, we're talking about this RFQ is for, we have $75,000 to plant in the current fiscal year. So the RFQ, we wait, and we'll be hearing back. And I guess as we sit here this evening, and this is a question for Rihanna, as we sit here this evening, we don't really know how many trees we're going to be able to plant for that 75. We have an estimate, but we don't know for certain because we're not fully certain on the price per tree. Or can you help us a little with that?
Yeah, so again, it's not the price of the trees, it's the supply and demand per the contractor. Meaning, when it was before COVID, we could get a good steady cost of some contractors' time and energy. What we are seeing in contracts, those are going up in price, meaning last year for the contractor's labor would be X dollars. Now we're seeing an increase for that contractor's labor costs, increasing up to 30%. So hope that explains the increase in the dollar figures that we are seeing from other RFQs and IFBs that we have submitted during this course of this fiscal year. The pricing is coming in a bit higher than expected.
So as a result of these inflationary costs, and we know we were dealing with the tree price having gone up over the last year or so. It could potentially, with the RFQ, we could find out that we're going to be planting even fewer trees because all that money is going to come out of that $75,000 to plant labor and materials, et cetera, trees, correct?
Correct.
And to your point about, and I guess we haven't really stopped to think about that, and I appreciate you bringing this up tonight, because when we message to council this go around and in the next fiscal year cycle for CIP, we want to make sure that we hit the point that it's not just struggling to meet our goal of planting trees because of the cost increase in trees, but also because of these cost increases. So we need to message that as well, and we really didn't do that this year. We talked more about just the per tree cost, but I think of all people in the organization, council will understand the increased labor costs. So we should make a note that when we do this again next year, that we include that. That is presuming that inflation will not go away suddenly, which I think we can all presume that inflation will not go away suddenly. But thank you for filling us in on that. Any other questions about, since we went from the calendar into planting, we'll go back to the calendar. And I did have one suggestion, and it came from Mark Rylander, who suggested after Mark Zollenhofer's filling us in, I believe, last month's meeting on CATS activities and CATS resources, that there's really not a reason why we have to wait once a year. I mean, there's something in there for CATS to report once a year in the annual report, and Mark will present this evening, and that's fine. But I think even if it's not in the calendar per se, we can certainly add it, but we'll try to do that more on a quarterly basis, because Mark Rylander and I, and I'm sure other commission members, learned some things. Mark was able to answer some questions that Mark had for the commission when the answers were actually going to CATS, go and see CATS resources or connect with CATS. So I think we should sort of add that in and make a note. I've talked to Peggy about that the CATS representative is actually bringing not an annual report every quarter, but a good summary and maybe answering some questions on a quarterly basis rather than just an annual basis. So, and I think Mark didn't disagree when I raised that with him. So I think that's one other thing. Neither of the Marks disagreed. I see them both smiling. So we'll call the calendar set with those changes. That includes the legislative agenda submitted to council in November, moving for this coming year, the Arborist 6-month dashboard, and building in a quarterly report for CATS. The last thing I just want to call your attention to, since you're probably all going to be pulling out your phones during the holidays and planning your next year, we have our dates set. That's our first Tuesday of each month. The only ones that would change are if the commission meets in July because of the fourth holiday, the commission chooses not to meet, fine. And then in August of the commission. So I just put those as tentative dates, but that's your notice in advance of commission meetings. So now we've talked about this a bit when Rhiannon was talking earlier, and now it's an opportunity for the commission to think about this. I sent out a list of draft questions that Peggy actually put together. Some of them came from the questions for the director and deputy director interviews that were done last month or the month before. I've lost track of time. And we also sent out the job description for urban forester. And I appreciated that Rhiannon informed us that job's been posted and the job description was posted as is. And I don't think we need to spend time going over the job description. It looked fine. There were, for future, and we can certainly raise this in interviews of candidates when that time comes, there were a few of those job tasks, or whatever they were called, job requirements, that could be fleshed out a little bit more based on our experience, the commission's experience. Not everybody's experience, but our experience that we've had with urban foresters, that we might want to probe a little when we question other candidates. So, but I don't think we really need to say very much about the job description itself, since it's already been posted, unless anybody has, any comments or anything that they read on that description that jumps out at them as unusual or wrong or something you didn't agree with. You can set that aside for now. I guess the issue, and I sent this out last week as sort of a draft list of questions, as an opportunity this evening as a commission meeting, committee of the whole, to just sort of spend a few minutes thinking about, since we're going to be participating in this process, since this is our most direct and ongoing contact with the Parks and Rec and with the city on all things trees, this is really our most important point person. And this is a good opportunity. It's been 5 years since we've been able as a group to think about this. And so it's a good opportunity to think about the past 5 years, and for some who've been on the commission even longer than that, and just think about what we might want to press candidates on to get a better sense of if we think they're a good fit for the job, and particularly from the perspective of the commission. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Usually Mark Rylander has some insight. He's like, why do you put me on the spot again? But if you had a chance to sort of look at these questions and think about, if you are the person sitting, there'll be one of us representing the commission, but if you're the person sitting there as a tree commissioner and you're thinking it's really important for me to get a sense of this candidate as to how they would do this or what their ideas are about this. Mark unmuted himself, so.
I did read through the descriptions, and I have to say that for whatever reason, our society seems to inflate responsibilities for almost any position to the point where it's almost impossible for the candidate to realistically say they could accomplish everything on the list. But it's also important because we're all multitaskers, and we all know that Mike, when he was here, had to do a lot of different kinds of things. And it's important to let them know that they might be called into service for anything from, GIS to the Emerald Ash Borer to answering, odd questions from the public to, running meetings and taking notes. So, I don't have any comments on the description itself. I do think that somehow within the ecosystem of Parks and Rec, that it'll be important to, I would like to be able to advocate for the urban forester having space to do their job. and not be pulled into a lot of other things. Might be easier said than done in the current climate, but I think, once the department is staffed up, I think we can hope that Mike would be able to, focus on tree stuff.
The new forester, correct.
Yeah.
But in terms of the questions, specifically, there are three sort of broad questions. One of them is sort of gauge their experience working with public input. Obviously, that's a direct question to see if they've had, we asked director and deputy director candidates too, if they had experience working with any kind of public advocacy group, especially a body like ours. And if so, sort of what their philosophy or, their approach to working with that body. So, I mean, that's an obvious area of questioning of candidates for urban forester, right? Because they're the point person to the commission. So I think we have that covered in that first question on the list that I sent you. In terms of sort of addressing that in Charlottesville and perhaps in other organizations in other cities, that responsibility for trees overall and climate sustainability and all of the issues and development and all that are obviously spread out around different departments, and for better or for worse. And we know what the challenges are with that for the commission and for staff. And so just getting a sense of candidates, if they've, what their experience is working from where they're coming from, are they in a more centralized situation where their department pretty much has authority on all aspects of trees and, climate things, or, have they had experience working cross-departmental? And, we'll see. I mean, we may be surprised, or we may get, the same answer from all the candidates, but we thought that actually would be a good avenue of questioning. And then the third one on the list is sort of a general question about something broader than trees and working on natural resources, because we talked about natural resources plan as opposed to just strictly a tree plan, an urban forest plan going forward. And so sort of gauging if candidates have any experience with that, so that, we would be informed as to, which do and which don't. I mean, those are three sort of high level series of questions. Is there anything in there that you think we should flesh out more? I see Jeff Warner waving his hand.
I couldn't find I don't have a button, sorry. I just, having been coming up, I guess now on 5 years since I was interviewed by the city, or 4 years, I'm sorry. It's, and the questions, sorry, my screen's a little off. I felt like when you were asking, there was one that just had sort of a kind of answered the question at the end. And I thought it might be better to just sort of, where there it is, critical and deeply interconnected objectives. That would seem like something you'd want the candidate to realize and make a comment on, and not sort of invite them to do that. Just my thought. It's and having interviewed, the assistant Robert Watkins that works with me, interviewed him 2 years ago, and just we kept the questions sort of really like, let's see what they do to fill in the blanks. So that was one thought. And then the second thought, again, just sort of from my perspective, the word urban forest, I mean, I know what it means, and I know an urban forester knows what it means. There is we sort of have we have a unique situation here in the sense that we're talking about trees in the right of way an awful lot. So I don't know, I mean, it's not something that really matters necessarily. It's just a thought. But I do know from the interviews, as you all know, whatever you ask one, you have to ask the other. So it seems like, and what I've learned the hardest in this job, even though I came from an advocacy side of the world, is it really critical how that your ability to work with folks, and to be out and have a public face and to walk onto someone's property and talk to them and be able to say, no, that's not what you can do, or this is what we need you to do. So, so I do think that human element it would be helpful to, I don't know, throw at someone hey, in this situation, what would you do? Or, gee, what's the worst interaction you've ever had with someone? I don't know, just to get a feel for that. Because if they're not able to be a face and able to stand there and have a conversation with someone that may be a little bit, rough, you'd like to know that. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great. No, I mean, appreciate your perspective because you've sort of been on the receiving end of this.
Yes.
So to take your points, again, I'll take this sort of in reverse. I do like that idea of the sort of the public face, because clearly we know our experience, and this has probably been true going back before Mike, but there's a lot of public interaction. So there needs to be an ability to deal well with the public, to advocate for trees, to be firm in that advocacy, but to be understanding of the public's needs and the public's position. My personal opinion, my example, we've had this conversation in the commission before, is that, at some point, we serve the public, all of us, and yet we serve not just one individual in the public. So, I would want to know if if you're pushed by somebody really, really hard, how far are you going to go to sort of advocate and negotiate for the trees in the right of way versus just saying, oh, well, we'll do whatever citizen X wants. So, I mean, getting at that in a general sense would be a good thing. To your point about the urban forest, I just want to be clear, since so you're suggesting that people may be coming from places where that concept is not quite what we think it is, or?
I guess it's more, I think of it in terms, maybe more of my background. I saw urban forest and I say, ooh, because I know, having worked with Mike so often, and I missed the guy. He was great. I've been joking with my wife. I said I wanted my daughter to meet him before he left town, but so I guess that opportunity's gone. But I know Mike was a quiet guy, and he was being pulled in a lot of directions, and he wasn't comfortable there. But the idea, when I talk with him about things, I really am talking about a row of trees in a median strip. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with him about a park land or anything like that. So I don't know. It was just more of a perspective that to try to tease out from someone. Yeah, you may have a forestry background, but we're talking about trees in an urban setting and not necessarily parkland. But it's probably not important. It's just offering that. If it resonates, if not, that's okay. These questions are fine. You can take it from there.
Yeah, no, that helps. I do like adding though something about dealing. We talked about dealing with the public, but more sort of specifically like retail dealing with the public, like actually being out there somewhere and talking to property owners as opposed to working with larger groups, I think would be a good insight, because there is a lot of that.
I was going to say the difficult question they asked me, I wasn't difficult, but it was the usual one, and we've used it. It said, all right, how do you link your job with the economic and fiscal future of the city? So how do you see what you do relative to the wealth of the city, how does it value into the importance of the city? So, but I'll stop there.
And bearing in mind too, that we're not the only ones on the panel. So we're not going to be able to get all of our questions in. In fact, we didn't get them all in, for the other series of interviews, just because there are others wanting to ask questions. And to your point about being pulled in many directions, that clearly, and we did express that to Mike in his exit interview, that we sense that the position does do that there is sort of dynamic within the city, even when everything is fully staffed. Some of that historically comes from the commission. And, going forward, I think the commission just needs to be cognizant of the fact that whoever assumes that role in the coming months is stepping into certainly an improving situation, there's no doubt about that, but one in which we need to be aware of the demands on their time. And obviously that person is the staff liaison, and it's a mutual relationship. We advocate for the goals of that person and the department. And we have certain expectations of staff resources and staff time. We need to respect and honor that time. And we need to make sure that the commission's interactions with that person as a staff person, and this is true in any organization, whether it's an arts organization, any kind of nonprofit, that we are doing that efficiently and not adding to the burden of that person in that role. And I think that we have certainly as a group gotten better about doing that. And Mike did express a sense that that was working well. And so, but again, you spend a lot of time trying to do your work. At the same time, you're trying to deal with this body that's out there that has, needs. And if it's efficient and organized, then it's not taking as much of your time. But I'm very concerned that whoever comes into the role, I would hate to see them burned out in the same similar way, because they're being asked to do too many things, being pulled in too many directions, and it becomes sort of an impossible task for whoever takes the role. Jody?
Excuse me, to that point, I'm less interested in the kinds of questions that are asked relative to the position's responsibilities than I am in the character of the person being hired. I feel like we need to have someone who can push back within the staff role and be more of a participant with us, the tree commission, and also with the other staff members, an articulate, strong person. I didn't see that much with Mike, and Mike was just too willing to please everybody. And well, that sounds terrible, but I do wish that, I hope that the new person will be a strong person that can just do what that can push back, that can keep the real objectives in mind of what his position or her position are. Sorry.
I don't think you're going to get much disagreement on that being an important part of the role. I think that, and again, not to be passing too much judgment and not to be assuming that somebody can come into the same situation and perform necessarily differently, but it is a tough place to be in, and it is a tough place to be in that position. I think, looking at it now for 6 years, and admittedly from the outside, but getting a pretty good sense. And I will say, Mike did over the past year, as things got tougher, did share with me, either directly or indirectly, sort of his experience, and indirectly when he felt he had nowhere to go. And so he would come to me for some tough issues, and that was fine. But I really feel that that person, as tough as it is, as tough a role as it is, has to be strong and has to be a strong advocate. And Peggy and I have talked about this. At the end of the day, it's a position that advocates for trees, the urban forest. And sometimes that means pushing back against those whose role is not to do that. And again, I'm trying to be fair here, whose role, whose purview, whose charge is not to do that necessarily, and or they don't really have the authority anyway to fight that fight. But the urban forester really needs to be somebody who's fighting that fight for all of us. And it's asking a lot, but I think we have to start from there. And then to your point, a lot flows down from that. There are some things that are teachable. There are ways in which you learn how to exist in an organization once you arrive there. You can learn new habits, unlearn bad habits, etc. But fundamentally, the urban forester is the one person in the city, the point person. Obviously, the entire department looks after trees, but that's really the person. It's so much hinges on that, working with the landscape manager, but certainly that hinges on that person. So Peggy and I had already discussed this, and and observing candidates in the interview and probing them for this is critical. Yeah. I don't know if Peggy wants to add anything there, but I think she feels as strongly about that as we do.
Yes, I mean, I agree. Since we only have one person on staff who is a tree hugger, we hope. I mean, the whole staff, whether it's Public Works, NDS, Parks, we want them to be a strong advocate for trees and, you know, the natural environment. And I think you're right, Jody. You know, we want them to be passionate, passionate advocate.
Any other comments? I think we've dealt with these questions. We'll make some adjustments. And Mark Z.
I don't know how the candidates learn about the total responsibilities that they have, but I've just been reading through the job description again, and I noticed that under the essential responsibilities and duties, the second from last paragraph says assisting as staff on the tree commission. And I didn't see anything referenced anywhere else in this document about the tree commission. And so how would this person know what the tree commission is, what it does, and how it can help him do his work? Because I feel like the tree commission is a big support for what the urban forester is trying to do in the staff position. But if this person doesn't have any idea about what the tree commission is or does, then asking those questions is kind of hitting him blind, unless there's something I'm missing. How does the tree forest, the urban forester, know what the tree commission does with him?
Well, that's an excellent point. I had actually marked it up on my copy, and I figured that we'd have to address that in the interview. But I think just for future reference on the job description, and there are a few edits that we're hoping we don't have to do this again anytime soon, but sort of I think would help flesh it out for future searches. But I would argue, first of all, from admittedly a biased position on the part of the commission, that perhaps that task should be somewhere a little higher than, you know, second to last on the list. But it isn't clear that you're not just staff. You really are a liaison. So I think it should be rewritten so that it's clear that there's a lot of interaction. And also by the bylaws, you are an ex officio member. I mean, you're officially a member of the commission, which I think would express, we could put more language in there, but I think that really would need to be beefed up so that they would understand what the tree commission, what their role is in the tree commission, and perhaps even a sentence in there that says, what is the tree commission? Like, what does that mean? So I take your point. The description has been posted, and that's fine. I think that we can, in the interview process, I think that we can start out by explaining in, you know, we don't have a lot of time, but in 10 or 15 seconds, you know, this is what the tree commission does, and this is what your role would be. It's a lot more than what it seems like it is in the job description. So I want to thank you, Mark, for calling that out. I think that's an excellent point.
Is there any possibility we could include a one-page handout or something with whatever materials are sent to the candidate that sort of gives him a scope of what the tree commission does so that they can read and prepare and come into the job offer candidacy better able to stand up for himself?
I think that's a question for staff, and we can take it up offline, but
Yeah.
there is a way to, yeah. Jeff?
I would just say, having stepped into where I'm on, well, I'm not on the BAR, I'm not on the entrance core review board, but we're, you know, Robert and I are staff for the Historic Resources Committee, but we specifically said we didn't want to be voting members. This, you know, this is they're appointed by council, you all, you know, but there's been, and again, it's probably a better offline just to sort of say how I've had to learn, well, what, you know, I don't work for the Historic Resources Committee. And so how you express to this individual that they don't work for you all, but yet you all are, just like the BAR is to me, but particularly folks that I go to and say, I don't know how to do this, help me out, or this is something new, what do you think? So you've got to establish that trust, but there's also where, I can't, I can go to a meeting and someone say, well, why can't staff do this? Or gee, somebody ought to do that. Great idea, but that group doesn't dictate what my responsibilities are. So I say there's sort of a balance there. And I think, you all, maybe it's just something you're going to have to cultivate individually. Once you have that person on board, it's not something that you can, I don't know, I take it from my coach's perspective, you just sort of, who are the players I've got, what are their personalities and how do we get them to work together? But you got to have them all on the field, and a coach with a whistle. But I just think you all should give that some thought outside of Channel 10, and how you want to interact with that individual. And I could certainly offer some assistance in that.
But I think generically, the point is that it's not clear from the job description.
No,
what
I get that. Yep.
What that role is, and that in fact it is much more. It is. I said earlier, it's sort of a two-way street. Like there's a reason why you are an ex officio member of the commission. Obviously, expertise, continuity, staff representation. But I said this to Mike, and I'll say this publicly. I never thought of Mike as my staff. He wasn't my staff. He didn't work for me. But he had a more important role than just somebody dropping into a meeting or, being assigned. And so that's where it's not clear from this. And so I'm hoping that we might find a way this round to, as Mark suggested, Mark Z, that we insert something in the materials that go out, or at least point them clearly to, the tree commission and what we do, so that when we show up at the interview process, they know what it means to be assisting the tree commission. And again, that's a sort of a two-way street. We are here as much to help staff and to help the city. I mean, that's really what we're here to do. We're here to advise council, but we're here to work together. It's a collaborative effort, and we need to be able to stress that. And then to your point, once that person gets here, obviously we figure out how that works out with a particular individual. So. All right, so it sounds like, and we'll talk offline with Rhiannon about this, but it sounds like we will be looking at some interviews in January, and we'll talk about representation on the interview panel. So that seems to be in good order, and we'll look forward to bringing a new forester on. I do want to circle back to one thing. The last few items we'll give Mark sort of the bulk of the time, since he's going to make a presentation. I know Peggy's is a very quick update, or at least relatively quick this month update. I think Tim will probably be just a relatively brief update, because obviously that rewrite is coming, but is not happening presently. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to circle back to the CIP. So I said, well, we had staff here, and especially Jody on Planning Commission, to sort of help us with the status of this. Our understanding is that after the round through Planning Commission, that our two CIP requests, to refresh memories, were for next fiscal year, 100,000 for planting and 105 as the first installment to deal with emerald ash borer. Our understanding from documentation we've seen is that right now that's going through as 75,000 for planting and 50 for emerald ash borer. Understanding that is also a public hearing coming up, I guess, next week. Those who are more in the know, is that accurate? And can you speak to those numbers? Is that where we are at 75 for planting and 50 for EAB?
Yes,
Anybody
that's
here?
where we are.
Okay.
So in the discussion, actually, other commissioners, planning commissioners, beat me to it to complain about the cuts in planting and EAB. And the result of that is we made recommendations to increase them, but at the same time, the one of the commissioners asked, well, is there another way that the public can make contributions toward tree planting? And so that's the genesis of the email I sent around with contact information of how the public can make contributions. I'm not very optimistic. There's an awful lot of pressure, a lot of hands wanting too little money, and it's only going to get worse. It is not going to get better. Looking ahead, the city is aiming is going towards a period in a few years when it will not be able to put out bonds. It will not be able to get bonds anymore because they will have reached their capacity. And so there's going to be a period of 2 to 3 years where there will be no capital improvements. I don't know how, I said it during the meeting, I don't know how that makes sense to all the economists in the city, but somehow it does. I think the city folks are hoping that something will happen in the way of a tax increase or a sales tax or real estate tax increases to offset this, but that's hard to imagine with the public with the public's thought process right now, with the kind of pushback we're seeing from the public for making any kind of increases for funding. So and the folks with the affordable housing, they're pushing real hard to get money increased for them. So it's going to be a difficult thing to change.
So what's the next step in the process? Am I correct? I seem to recall is there a public hearing coming up soon?
Yeah, next Tuesday, public hearing, and then it goes from us to city council in January, I believe. Or is it in December? Sorry, I should know, but I have a hard enough time keeping up with planning commission.
Well, it's a long, isn't it I can't remember this calendar either, but it's a series of meetings. So this is sort of kicking off the that's why I don't even look at the numbers yet, because this is going to be a sequence of meetings and opportunities for input. So, but
Yeah.
you all with the planning commission, you'll pass it off to council.
And Jeff, am I correct in thinking there are 2 readings? There's a first reading and then there's a public hearing by council?
I don't know. I just know it's always seems like it just goes on, and there's another meeting and another meeting and another meeting. So I know there are plenty of opportunities for input, but yeah, you definitely want to strike while the iron's hot, so they say. But it is it's not like it's over in the next 2 weeks.
Correct.
No, I think, no, thanks. We understand that. It's just, I feel like in some years we found ourselves behind the 8 ball because we came in
Yeah.
a little later
Yep.
in the process, and we want to make sure that we're tracking the process. And so, we will go through those hoops. And I guess for next week, for the public hearing, I just wanted to be clear on this, that what's being put forward, at least in this stage, is reduced from what we have asked for. We can make an argument for restoration, but you're telling us that, we have to make a pretty damn good argument to restore, but we should certainly at least be defending what's going forward, because obviously we need those funds.
Yes.
That seems to be where we are.
We need to keep banging on the message.
Okay. So that is a public hearing, which means that all of us can sign up to speak at that hearing, correct? It's a Zoom, it's a virtual hearing. So that means that each of us as commissioners, there's no one representative can actually make a statement. This is a public, an oral statement that will be made.
Yeah.
I'm saying, so for the benefit of commissioners, we'll get you the time of that hearing and the way to be involved. I think it would be good. I know in the past we've had a couple of voices, but I don't think it hurts to have a few more voices, just, reminding people that, it may be a little too soon to talk about this in terms of the canopy study because we still don't have the final report, but certainly based on the arguments that we've made so far, which are sound arguments, we need to continue to defend these numbers. Rian, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, just listening to your robust conversations. There is a planning commission public hearing for FY 23 to 27 capital improvement projects, and that starts at 6:30 on December 14th. So it is a public hearing.
Thank you. So that's a week from tonight.
Yeah,
Yes,
Brian, I just sent you the link to the calendar.
Okay,
and I just sent you the agenda and meeting items that I received today.
okay. And for all
Brian, this
commissioners,
is Vic.
yes, Vic,
I just wanted to say that, yeah, December 14th really is the kickoff. I know we met November 23rd and there was discussion. Nakia Walker was the city council individual that attended, but this is the big one. This is your public input, and they'll really get down to listening on the 14th.
thank you. So for all commissioners, and I know we're all busy people, but to take a moment next week to join in, you have the memo that we sent to Planning Commission, which outlines the justification for these funds. And I think it reiterates a lot of what was in the actual CIP request, which Mike shared with us. But I will send both sets of documents out to all commissioners tomorrow. So you can look at those and please, if it's possible, to sign up. And, I guess as we're coming to the end of this meeting, this is something we can do based on all the news we're hearing. So, and I feel like it's the least we can do at this time to sort of put this out and just keep, as somebody said, just keep sounding the bell and banging away at this. So that's good to know. Mark Zollenhofer, now for the CATS report, please.
Yes. Before I give you the CATS report, I wanted to give you an item that the CATS board asked me to bring to you. We had a membership meeting last month, and I'm trying to find the name of the speaker because it escapes me right now. But she is the University of Virginia landscape architect, Mary, I think.
Mary Hughes.
Yes, Mary Hughes, thank you. And she gave us a presentation of the development that's going to be that's connecting North Grounds with Central Grounds at the corner of Ivy and Emmett Street. And it was very interesting. But one of the things that caught the attention of all of the CATS members who were listening was she said that the streetscape and the right-of-way on Ivy Road going out from the university out towards Ivy, there's, I think, 14 acres on the north side there that's being developed. And the university has the responsibility for the design and engineering of that streetscape. And they have some pretty ambitious plans with widening the sidewalks and making trees, street trees available. But she said in passing that the Emmett Street portion of that project, from Emmett Street at Ivy all the way up to Barracks Road, is the responsibility of the city. And there are concerns that the city doesn't have sufficient funding to make sure that the sidewalks are as wide to complement what's going in on Ivy Road, as well as having enough earth volume for the roots of street trees. And that the university, I think, is planning to use what are called silva cells, I didn't know what those were, but I looked them up, and it's underground structures that keep the dirt from compacting and allow the tree roots to grow into the soil, so that with a fairly modest amount of width of earth at the street level, there's still enough root capacity for solid trees to grow. And that it's an expensive way to do it, but it guarantees viability. And her concern was that the city isn't necessarily aware of the implications of this joint development. And Katz wanted to advocate to the tree commission that somehow we find out who's involved with the city in working with the university as this project unfolds, because they're going to begin doing that work in 2022. And I don't know what role the city has and who is appointed to deal with all of that. One of our CATS board members is going to contact Mary to find out if she can give us the information about who in the city is responsible for working with the university on this project. But obviously it's a pressing issue because the timetable is advancing pretty rapidly. Those of you who have been on Emmett Street with all the blockage as they put new conduits to handle the creek, that part is almost done. And I don't know when the rest of the streetscape work will be done as site work, but it's a matter of import. And so wanted to give that item to the tree commission to say we should find out something and hopefully advocate for being complementary to what the university is doing.
Before we move to your report, can staff elaborate on this project? I know the commission had a representative in the steering committee, Peter Russell, and that was going way back. We really haven't had, I don't think those meetings, because it was Smart Scale. I believe it is Smart Scale. So we really haven't been in touch with that project. Is there anybody who can shed light on this? If not, we'll take it up offline.
So I recommend that, I'm sure NDS is the city agency that is doing the site plan review and the utilities. And so I would contact Missy Creasy to find out who is managing this for the city. And I would also, just as an FYI, Mary Hughes is retiring at the end of this year. And Rachel Lloyd has been hired to take her place. So Rachel Lloyd will be the new, the new landscape architect.
Fantastic. That fills in a gap, but I will send Missy a note. And just so I know there's the Emmett Street streetscape. That's one question. And I'm not sure, I think the individual who's covering that is not at NDS anymore. But then this is also the work just along the Ivy Street as you turn heading out to the west, and who does what, who's on first. I'll send Missy a note. You certainly all can follow up, but I'll follow up with her and just say there were some questions about who's the liaison, who's coordinating those things. And I can tell you, I don't know. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. And I sat on the review of the Emmett Street portion, and I agree with Jeff that it's probably not the full piece. At the time, the trees were not even really being addressed by Smart Scale. So it was, the trees were in no man's land, and it was an afterthought really for that sidewalk area. So it would be a good thing to ask about how that's evolved and who's responsible for the tree portion, because I don't even think it was part of the Smart Scale funding.
Yeah. And it's, this is another example where we had a situation that was obviously on private property, but it was entry corridor farther up Ivy Road. It sort of comes upon us. We didn't realize something was happening, and we get citizens asking us what's going on, and, legitimately. But this one, at least in its initial phase, the Smart Scale part was one in which we had a seat on the steering committee, albeit, that's early in the process. So if it's an example of like, sometimes these projects go on and it's hard. We have a lot to do as commissioners, but keeping track. Jody knows, he sat on the Fontaine one, I've sat on the East High Street one, steering committee, I've sat on the Barracks Road, Emmett, but you just kind of have to keep your nose in the door to sort of know where things are going, and because otherwise you miss out. I'm not saying we've missed out here, and I appreciate Mark bringing this up, but this is a perfect example of, you know, did we miss out at some point in the process? Have we not been in touch with something?
And Brian, I would maybe alter what you said, missed out. I am, from my experience, the consultants were simply doing the public engagement because they were required to, and they were flying through it as quickly as they could and with as little feedback from the committee as possible, because that only slowed them down. So they often deliberately did not keep us up to date.
Yeah. And to that point, and I'll say this publicly, that is the difference between each of these projects, depending on who the consultants are. I just feel like sometimes it's just lip service and it's frustrating. But, you know, I guess the theme of the night is the only thing is we can do is just try to fight the good fight on all these issues and just, you know, stay in touch. But for these smart scale projects, there are still several outstanding, and I've touched base a few times. And I'll follow up with Jeff in the new year on sort of where these other ones stand, because we made some gains on some of these projects. We actually negotiated, you know, with Bike Ped and others on East High Street. But I said this to the commission, I'll say it again, we still can't take our eye off that, like, because it's not a done deal. And we're the only voice there at the table to argue for the trees. And even in the best process where people are listened to and it's not just a rote process, you still have to just be engaged and still have to be like a bulldog. You don't make friends, but so be it. So Jeff, I'll follow up with you also on some other things in the new year, not
Fine.
but if we could hear about this one as soon as you know something or some, that would be great. All right, back to Mark Z. And I will notify the commission. We are going to run, it's the last meeting of the year. We are going to run a few minutes late just because we'll have a couple of updates and public questions, but we keep stealing time from Mark. So Mark Z.
Just wanted to say, in addition to what I said before, is that the CATS membership group was very excited about what they saw, the university proposal and the renderings of the architect, which included lots of trees, and it was a wonderful thing. And we just like to encourage this collaboration rather than animosity. So that's where this came from. First of all, for the president and the administration portion of CATS, just a few facts to highlight. There was a founder's tree planted at the Department of Forestry that represented the original board and members of CATS. I think it's 12 years old now, something like that. There are 128 paid members for 2021. The CATS organization did an OLLI class at UVA titled Tree Blindness that was very well attended. We had 2 potting parties for tree planting for our tree nursery last year that were successful, and they resulted in 2 tree sales, one in the spring for just members because of COVID. And we sold 285 trees. And then there was a tree sale out at Tufton Farm for the public that sold 304 trees. So that's a fundraiser for us, but it also gets a lot of really nice trees out into the community at very affordable pricing. They're $5, $10, and $15. And then there was a memorial tree planted over at PVCC in memory of one of the professors in the art department who somebody wanted to give a tree in memory of her. So CATS helped to accomplish that. The education committee has 11 classes for the public during the year on planting, pruning, and invasive plant management with 450 attendees at those. There were 9 live tree walks where people were wearing masks and distancing, and those had 75 attendees. And then the new class for new tree stewards, there were 26 that completed the class, and they used a hybrid training model where all of the normal lecture material was presented online. But then they had field classes where they learned the applications of plant pruning, invasive control, and tree planting. And then the projects committee had invasive control projects at a number of the schools. I won't, because we're low on time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there was also basic tree care, which was mulching and weeding at a number of the parks in the city, and pruning on Berkmar in the spring and the fall, and on the John Warner Parkway in January and the fall. Tree planting, there were 3 trees planted at Jackson Via in the spring, and at Darden Towel there were 37 trees this fall, and at 10th and Page there were 10 trees in the little project that Katz is beginning that I think Roxanne White and Peggy Van Yeries are going to be addressing with the Relief Seaville. But Katz is getting a little bit of a momentum going for the community with Jeremy Kaplan helping to make those liaison connections. Jeremy Kaplan also provided $2,500 from the Kaplan Foundation for that tree planting project. And he used his connection to find homeowners that wanted trees on their property. And so there have been 3 planting dates where those 10 trees have been planted, and there's an additional 3 or 4 that are planting yet this fall or early in January or February. The communications committee, we have a mailing list of nearly 1,000 names that have people have signed up when they've come to tree sales or tree walks or whatever to be on our mailing list. So we have a good way to reach quite a few people in the community. And because of that, our training class filled up in record time, even though it was going to be online. People found out about it and signed up quickly. Media coverage, apparently on August 3rd, Hannah Scholl of CBS News ran a story about the training class for fall. And then we had some promotions. And our website has been redesigned and developed. We have somebody managing our Facebook page. We have 700 followers on that. The Charlottesville Community Engagement had 8 announcements, and there were 954 and 1,475 views per topic. And the mailing list, we had 16 mailing list blasts to the CATS membership over the course of the year. And then our other communications person sent 12 mailings to the public mailing list. So in the view of COVID and all of the stuff that limited the things that we normally would want to do, we're still very active, had a good active membership, and we're proud of the trees that we help. And the CATS board, I meet as an ex officio member so that I can report back to you guys what's going on, and also report back to them what the tree commission is doing. And it seems like it's a pretty valuable partnership, and CATS is very eager to advocate for things that are important to the tree commission, and we can use the public access that we have to promote things that are important to the city in view of the trees.
Yeah, thank you for that. Indeed, thank you for that excellent report. And I think what this highlights is that we have, since we're back up to full strength as a commission, I think in the coming year, finding a way, and obviously exiting the worst of the pandemic and gathering more together, but certainly the resources that would be available, the synergy between the 2 organizations, you have a built-in sort of advocacy base. We need to sort of make it a goal to work more directly with you. I'm just thinking like if the public hearing that's coming up next week, it'd be lovely to have that thing swamped with people who want to sign up. And I know it's more than trees, but you know what I'm saying? It's like you have the, you know, you have this, or for example, the thing that's been circulating with funding trees in the city, we don't maintain a list, obviously, and we're not going to poach from you necessarily, and we're not going to compete, but there are ways in which I think we could coordinate a bit more as we've done in the past on tree plantings. So I put that out there for the commission, that hearing that report and hearing what you all were able to accomplish under the circumstances, there are certainly more avenues for us to collaborate. And I hope in the new year that we can explore those more. So thank you, Mark. Any questions from any commissioners, anything that Mark reported? And by the way, if you are not familiar with the CATS website and also the resources, I know some of you are the double duty, they're actually CATS people and also serving on the commission, but those of you who aren't, it's a great place to go to, all things trees. So I encourage you to go and look there. Peggy didn't really have a report. I'm sorry, Mark?
One thing I'd like to highlight is the 37 trees that were in Darden. A number of those were ash trees that had to come down. And so there was a collaboration between the county and CATS because our tree class was, I forget how many members, I guess there were 10 teams of 3 students each that worked on about a 2-inch caliper tree and taught those members how to plant a fairly large tree. And so the new class benefited from the experience, and the park received some replacements for some ash trees. And so that's a great example of the symbiosis between Tree Commission and the county and CATS and the new members. It was all very good. And as we did it, the people that were walking through the park, walking their dogs or going to soccer games or whatever, were totally amazed at this volunteer effort of let's plant trees. It was a great PR thing.
Yeah, we need to explore ways to do more of that, both the commission and city staff. So thank you again for that. Peggy did not have a report this month because they've done so much work each month, but she does have one thing to share with us that I think is a bright spot, something new. Are you prepared to share that with everybody?
Yeah, well, I'll give a little report about Relief Seville. We've been working on our image and our message, mainly our logo, our handout and website, and we've had to reduce our text down from 4 pages to 1, and Jean has been helping us with that. So I will quickly show you that. Our logo, we wanted it to, you know, our tagline is nurturing kids and communities through nature. Our mission is to protect our community's health and well-being from the impact of climate change by focusing on neighborhoods which currently lack adequate tree canopy. So how we'll do that, we'll plant trees, we'll preserve existing trees, and we'll educate kids and families about trees and nature. And we've been focusing on education right now because we hope through educating, getting kids and families excited about nature and trees that they'll want to plant them next fall. So anyway, so I'm going to show you our logo, which we're pretty proud of. We wanted it to look nurturing without looking like grandmother. And so we wanted to be contemporary, and that somebody would want to wear on a t-shirt. So let's see if I can share my screen again.
This is what they call a brand reveal.
All right, so if you can see that, that's our property in Bath County. Don't you wish we were all there?
I've been wondering where that is the whole meeting. Like, I want to go there, but I thought it was down the street. All right.
Lots of trees, lots of trees.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can get this up. So this is our new logo. And as you remember, we told you we flipped it from Seville Relief to Relief Seville. It would be more active. And we hope this conveys the message of sheltering Seville and providing shade and relief. So that's, and then the,
Can you hold there for a minute? I really love, just when you look at it, I really love the sense of the shade in terms of the gradation of color. I think that's wonderful.
yeah. I mean, you know, when you finally come to a logo, you think, oh, that was easy, but this has taken hours, hours and hours. And then what's called the handle, which you often use on social media sites and whatnot, will be the R just with the relief. But we think this will have a lot of meaning to people. And so we're pretty excited about it. Just to tell you a few other things, we're meeting with St. Paul's Church, a group, climate justice group, who had heard about us, and we're meeting with them on Thursday night. And a woman who's head of that, Peggy, I'm not going to pronounce her name correctly, but Plews or Ogan is a doctor at UVA, and she's going to help us hopefully get some statistics on the health consequences of not having shade in our heat islands, particularly 10th and Page. And they did this in Richmond, where they were able to document health-related, heat-related illnesses. We're working on trying to get a spring event either at CHS or Washington Park, where we want to focus on teenagers and help them learn about jobs in the green industry, and even jobs they might have this summer or just internships. And Jacqueline's helping us do that. And then we're also working on getting teenagers ambassadors in 10th and Page will help us go around to the families and let them know about the benefits of trees and hopefully get them to plant a tree. And we're going to partner with the 3Cs, which is the Community Climate Collaborative, because they want to let people know, particularly in our neighborhoods, about all the benefits you can get for energy efficiency. There's lots of money out there for homes to benefit their energy efficiency in their homes. So we're going to work with them, and we're going to get these teenagers to go with us with volunteers, either from our organization or the Tree Stewards, to educate families about this. So anyway, that's just a quick update and of what we're doing.
Thanks. Very exciting as always, and really great to see the image, and look forward to more work from that group in the new year. I listed Tim for a report. I think this is probably brief because I don't think there's been since council's approved, but can you give us a sense of where your committee is looking next, when it's going to start its work?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Brian. Well, Vicki and Jeff Picelli and Mark and I, we've not met since there's no updates in terms of, production work on our codes committee. But yeah, as you just alluded to, and I think as everybody knows, City Council adopted the comprehensive plan November 15th. So the plan has always been for the consultant for Seville Plans Together to quickly pivot to the zoning ordinance review and rewrite after the comprehensive plan. They were originally planned to overlap a little bit, but the community, the planning commission, the council all focused on the comprehensive plan all the way up through November. So the latest announcement or communication from the consultant Roadside Hartwell is to circle around to the zoning work starting in January. They said they'd be doing some kind of preparation work through this month and then contact that steering committee for the zoning kickoff sometime in January. So, we're really on deck in a lot of ways, and we'll have to be meeting and, preparing some type of deliverable to share with the consultants and the other members of the steering committee I don't know that we need to do the work of rewriting the ordinance, but at least giving a blueprint and a framework for how and where we'd like to see improvement.
Okay, that's great. Great timeline. We have one or two community resources, folks, that with knowledge that can help us with this and sort of buttress the committee. And obviously, anything that we're going to submit as part of that process, we'll just need to build in some time to get it before the commission and have discussion and all that. But that sounds good. Sounds like we're on track. And as we've said many times, it's a critical thing. Do we have, to our moderator, do we have any public questions from the public? We're almost ready to wrap up the meeting, but we always leave time. Anybody's hand up with a question?
No hands raised at the moment. If you'd like to speak, please click the raise hand icon or press *9. You're joining us via telephone, if I don't think you are. Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay, everybody, I want to thank you for your time and your additional time this evening. Two things as we go. If you, and I'm thinking of Peggy and Mark Zollenhofer, if you have notes that you can, for the reports you presented, even just short notes, bullet points that you can forward on to me, that I could forward on to Paige, which would help a little in the scrivening of the meeting, because we did talk about a lot. So if we have anything that we can provide in writing, doesn't have to be formal, fancy, that would be helpful. At least we could check against. And then the last thing, which I didn't mention on the calendar is, and it's the thing I'm most excited about, we have picking new leadership next month in January. So everybody give that some thought. We'll be having chair and vice chair elections. Sounds like we just did them. We just did them back in January. What's the day after we did them? The Capitol was stormed. So hopefully we won't have that effect on people this time around, but we have that every January. So it is something to look forward to. And unless there are any other comments or questions or issues that we didn't raise at this meeting, I don't see any. So again, I wish you happy holidays. Thank you for all your time and effort, and be there for the public hearing next Tuesday, the 14th. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Hi, y'all.
Everybody.
Take care.
Happy
Happy holidays.
holidays.